What's an invention you can't believe doesn't exist yet? Story 1. Something to actually fix. Tinnitus feels like one of those inventions that should exist by now, especially when you realize how many people deal with it and how constant it is. It's not like a headache or something that comes and goes. It's just there, all the time, this ringing or buzzing that never fully shuts off, like your brain forgot how to be quiet. And what makes it worse is how little there is that truly helps. You look it up and it's always the same kind of answers. Manage it. Mask it. Learn to live with it. White noise, apps, therapy, sound machines. But none of it actually fixes the problem. It just kind of distracts you from it. And that's the frustrating part, because it feels like we've advanced so far in technology, medicine, neuroscience. But this one thing that affects daily life in such a direct way is still basically unsolved. It messes with sleep, focus, even just moments of silence. Silence isn't really silence anymore, it's just you and the noise. And over time, that wears on you in a way that's hard to explain unless you've experienced it. So yeah, it's wild that we don't have something more direct by now. Not a workaround, not a coping mechanism. Something that actually targets the cause and shuts it off. Because for something that constant, something that invasive, it feels like the kind of problem that should have a real solution. And the fact that it doesn't yet is honestly kind of hard to believe. Story 2. Dental regeneration is one of those things that feels like it should already be a standard part of healthcare, especially when you realize how common dental issues are and how outdated the solutions still feel. Like, think about it. If something goes wrong with your teeth, the best we can do is basically repair or replace. Fillings, crowns, implants, root canals. It's all about patching damage or swapping things out with artificial versions. And yeah, it works, but it doesn't actually restore what was originally there. It's more like maintenance than healing, which is weird because your body already knows how to grow teeth. It just stops after a certain point. So the idea that we don't have a reliable way to trigger that process again, to regrow enamel, repair decay naturally, or even grow a completely new tooth, feels like a massive gap, especially when you consider how advanced medicine has become in other areas. We're talking about regenerating tissues, working with stem cells, doing incredibly complex procedures, but when it comes to teeth, it's still drills and replacements. And then there's the cost. Dental work isn't just uncomfortable, it's expensive. And because it's often treated separately from general health care, people either delay it or avoid it entirely, which just makes things worse over time. So now you've got a problem that's both common and progressive, with solutions that are reactive instead of preventative or regenerative. It just feels like we're stuck in this loop of fixing the same issues over and over instead of actually solving them at the root. So yeah, the fact that we don't have a simple, reliable way to regenerate teeth yet, something that lets your body repair itself instead of relying on artificial fixes, is kind of hard to believe, especially for something that affects almost everyone at some point. Story 3. A machine that can record and play back smells feels like one of those inventions that should already exist, especially considering how powerful smell is compared to everything else. Like a single scent can instantly bring back a memory, a place, a moment, way more vividly than a photo or a video sometimes. And yet, we've got Ultra HD cameras, surround sound, VR. But smell is just completely missing from the equation. Imagine being able to capture the smell of something the same way you take a picture. The air after rain, a specific place from your childhood, a meal someone made years ago. Things that are almost impossible to describe but instantly recognizable when you experience them. Right now, those are just gone, unless you happen to encounter them again by chance. And what's weird is how much it would change things. Movies, games, even just memories would feel completely different if you could actually experience the scent tied to them. It would add a whole layer of realism that we just don't have. Instead of just seeing and hearing something, you'd actually feel like you're there. But at the same time, it makes sense why it's so difficult. Smell isn't just one thing. It's made up of tons of different chemical compounds, all interacting in really complex ways. So, it's not like recording sound or video, where you're capturing a single signal. You'd have to break down and recreate entire combinations of molecules in the right proportions, which is way harder than it sounds. Still, the fact that we don't have even a basic version of this yet is kind of surprising, because smell is such a huge part of how we experience the world, and right now, it's one of the only senses we can't capture, store, or replay. And that makes it feel like one of the biggest missing pieces in technology. Story 4. A system where you could get free genetic testing on a cold virus and trace exactly who gave it to you sounds like something straight out of the future, but also kind of feels like it should be possible with how advanced things already are. Because technically, viruses can be sequenced. They have slight variations, tiny mutations, like fingerprints, which means, in theory, you could track how one strain spreads from person to person. So, the idea isn't completely unrealistic. It's more like something we just haven't turned into an everyday tool. And honestly, the social impact of that would be wild. No more guessing where you got sick. No more, it could have been anyone. You'd actually know. That coworker who showed up coughing, that friend who said they were fine, suddenly it's not speculation anymore, it's traceable, and that alone would probably change how people act when they're sick. At the same time, it might create more problems than it solves, because now you're not just dealing with being sick, you're dealing with blame. People pointing fingers, getting called out, maybe even avoiding others out of fear of being tracked. It turns something that's normally just an inconvenience into something more personal, almost like responsibility is being assigned in a way it never was before. And then there's the privacy side. Tracking viruses at that level would mean collecting and analyzing a lot of biological data, and once you open that door, it raises questions about how that data is used, who has access to it, and where the line gets drawn. So yeah, it feels like something that could exist, at least in some form, but whether it actually should is a different question, because knowing exactly who gave you a cold might sound satisfying, until you realize everything that comes with that level of visibility. Story 5. Microwaves are one of those things that feel like they should have evolved way more by now, but somehow they're basically doing the exact same job they were doing decades ago, just with a slightly nicer interface. Like, yeah, they heat food. That's it. And not even in a great way. Half the time it's uneven. One part is burning hot, while the other is still cold. Textures get weird, things turn soggy or rubbery depending on what you're heating. It works, but it always feels like a compromise rather than something that's actually been optimized, which is weird because look at how much everything else has improved. Phones, TVs, cars, even basic kitchen appliances have gotten smarter, faster, more precise. But microwaves still feel like they're stuck in this good enough phase where nobody really pushed them further. You've got presets and buttons, but under the hood it's still the same basic process. Blasting energy and hoping it distributes evenly. It feels like there should be a smarter version by now. Something that actually scans the food, understands its composition, heats it evenly all the way through without ruining texture. Like precise heating instead of guesswork. You press a button and it just works perfectly every time. No rotating plates, no stopping halfway to stir it, no cold spots. But instead, we're still doing the same routine. Heat, check, mix, heat again. And that's what makes it surprising. Not that microwaves don't work, but that for something used so often, the experience hasn't really been refined in a meaningful way. It feels like one of those everyday things that just never got its real upgrade. Story 6. A way to record and watch your dreams back after you wake up feels like one of those inventions that would be equal parts incredible and slightly terrifying. Because dreams are weird. You wake up and for a few seconds, it all feels real, like you were just somewhere else, doing something that made sense in the moment. And then it starts slipping away. Details fade, the logic falls apart, and within minutes, you're left with fragments that don't quite connect anymore. And there's always that feeling like there was more there that you just can't access. So the idea of being able to hit play and actually see what your brain created while you were asleep is kind of insane. You'd finally get answers to all those half-remembered moments. What actually happened? Did it make any sense at all? Was it as vivid as it felt? Or completely chaotic when viewed from the outside? But at the same time, it might not be as cool as it sounds. Because dreams aren't filtered the way your waking thoughts are. They're raw, random, sometimes uncomfortable, pulling from memories, fears, things you didn't even realize were in your head. Watching that back might feel less like entertainment and more like looking into something you're not used to seeing directly. And then there's the question of interpretation. Would it even make sense when you watch it? Or would it just look like a disjointed sequence of images that only felt meaningful while you were inside it? Still, it feels like something that should at least be possible at some point. We can already track brain activity, visualize patterns, decode certain signals. It doesn't seem impossible that one day we could reconstruct something close to what we experienced during sleep. But whether you'd actually want to watch all of it, that's a different question, because some things might be better left as fragments you forget. Story 7. A mosquito-killing device where you just hit a button and every mosquito within like 30 meters instantly drops. Sounds like one of those inventions that would immediately become a global bestseller. No marketing needed. Because mosquitoes aren't just annoying, they're relentless. You can be minding your own business, completely still, and somehow they find you. One buzz near your ear and suddenly your whole focus is gone. You turn the lights on, try to track it, miss it, turn the lights off again, and repeat. And that's just one. Now imagine being outside, or in a place where there are dozens of them, and the current solutions all kind of suck. Sprays smell weird and don't always work. Zappers get a few, but not all. Nets help, but you're basically hiding from them. It always feels like you're reacting instead of actually solving the problem. So the idea of just pressing a button and clearing the entire area instantly feels like the kind of upgrade that should exist by now. No chasing them, no guessing where they are, no waking up covered in bites. Just silence. But then you start thinking about how that would even work, and it gets complicated fast. You'd need something that can detect and target only mosquitoes without affecting anything else, and do it instantly across a wide area. That's way more precise than it sounds. Still, with how advanced sensors, lasers, and tracking tech have gotten, it doesn't feel completely impossible anymore. And honestly, for something that affects so many people, in so many places every single day, it feels like the kind of problem that deserves a more satisfying solution than what we've got. Because at this point, it's not even about convenience, it's about finally winning. Story 8. A pill that protects you from the sun instead of having to constantly apply sunscreen feels like one of those things that should already exist, especially considering how much we understand about UV damage and how common sun exposure is. Because sunscreen works, but it's annoying. You have to remember to apply it, reapply it, use enough of it, cover everything properly, deal with the texture, the smell, the whole routine. And even then, you're never completely sure if you did it right or if it's still effective after a few hours, especially if you've been sweating or in water. So, the idea of just taking a pill in the morning and being protected for the day sounds almost too convenient. No reapplying, no missing spots, no greasy feeling. Just consistent internal protection that works across your whole body automatically. It would completely change how people deal with sun exposure, especially in places where being outdoors is part of daily life. But the challenge is what it would actually have to do. It's not just about blocking sunlight, it's about protecting your skin at a cellular level from UV damage, which is complex. You'd need something that either absorbs or neutralizes that damage from the inside without causing other issues and does it safely over time. There are already hints of this idea. Certain supplements that claim to help with UV resistance or reduce damage, but nothing that replaces sunscreen in a reliable, complete way. So, it's not completely out of reach, but it's not solved either. And that's what makes it feel like such a missing piece. Because something so simple, so universal, protecting yourself from the sun, still relies on a method that feels outdated and easy to mess up when it seems like there should be a more seamless solution by now. Story 9. A real treatment for Alzheimer's. Not something that slows it a little, not something that buys a bit of time, but something that actually stops it or reverses it, feels like one of the biggest missing pieces in modern medicine. Because it's not just a disease, it's a slow erasing. You're not just losing physical ability, you're losing memory, personality, identity, the things that make someone who they are. And it doesn't happen all at once, which almost makes it harder. It's gradual, piece by piece, where families watch someone they know slowly fade while still being physically there. And what's frustrating is how limited the options still are. There are treatments that can help manage symptoms or slow progression slightly, but nothing that truly fixes the underlying problem. No clear reset, no way to restore what's been lost. And for something that affects so many people, across so many families, it feels like we should be further along by now. Part of the difficulty is how complex the brain is. It's not like repairing a bone or treating an infection. You're dealing with networks, memories, structures that aren't fully understood even now. So even identifying the exact cause, whether it's plaques, proteins, inflammation, or a combination of factors, has been a challenge, let alone reversing it. But still, it feels like the kind of problem that should have a breakthrough at some point. Not just slowing things down, but actually restoring function, giving people back their memories, their sense of self, their connection to the people around them. Because for something that takes so much, so quietly, and so completely, the lack of a real solution is hard to accept. And that's why it feels like one of the most important inventions that Story 10, a memory recorder, something that could capture and replay your actual memories, feels like one of those inventions that would completely change how we experience life in ways that are both incredible and kind of unsettling at the same time. Because memories aren't like photos. They fade, they distort, they get reshaped over time. Two people can experience the same moment and remember it completely differently, and even your own memories change the more you revisit them. So the idea of having a way to lock in a moment exactly as it happened and then replay it whenever you want feels almost unreal. You'd never really lose anything again. Moments with people, places you've been, conversations, experiences, all of it could be preserved perfectly. No more, "I think it happened like this." No more details slipping away. You could go back and relive something exactly as it was, not just how you remember it, but at the same time, that changes things. Part of what makes memories meaningful is that they're imperfect. They fade, they blur, they become something emotional rather than exact. If everything is recorded and replayable, does it stop feeling like a memory and start feeling like footage? And then there's the privacy side, your thoughts, your experiences, your internal world. If those can be recorded, who controls that? Who gets access? Can it be shared, hacked, misused? Suddenly, something that was completely personal becomes something that could exist outside of you. Still, from a technology standpoint, it doesn't feel impossible forever. We're already mapping brain activity, decoding signals, reconstructing images from neural patterns in early forms. It's not that far-fetched to imagine a future where something like this exists in some capacity. But whether it would be purely a gift or something more complicated is another question entirely, because being able to remember everything perfectly might not feel the way we think it would. Story 11. A true cure for cancer. Not just treatments, not just managing it, but something that can reliably eliminate it across the board. Feels like the kind of invention that should already exist, especially considering how much time, money, and research has gone into it. Because cancer isn't rare, almost everyone is touched by it in some way, whether directly or through someone they know. And the impact isn't just physical, it's emotional, financial, mental. It affects everything. So, the idea that we still don't have a simple, universal solution makes it feel like one of the biggest gaps in modern medicine. But part of the reason it's so difficult is that cancer isn't just one thing. It's not like a single disease with a single cause. It's a whole category of conditions where cells grow and behave abnormally. And that can happen in different ways, in different parts of the body, for different reasons. So finding one cure that works for everything is way more complex than it sounds. And we have made progress. Treatments have improved. Survival rates for certain cancers have increased. New approaches like targeted therapies and immunotherapy are changing how it's treated. But none of that feels the same as a true cure. Something simple, reliable, and accessible that just fixes it. That's what people imagine. Something that doesn't require months of treatment, harsh side effects, uncertainty, or massive cost. Something that restores health without taking so much out of the person going through it. And that's why it feels so surprising that we're not there yet. Because for something so widespread, so impactful, it feels like the kind of problem that should have a clearer solution by now. But until it does, it remains one of those inventions that feels both essential and just out of reach. Story 12. Honestly, a quicker way to get rid of some pests. I work in the industry, and so much of our work relies on week or month-long residuals. Granted, a lot of that is due to safety. I always tell people if you can kill all the roaches or pretty much any pest in your dwelling in under 24 hours, it will probably kill you too. We now utilize a biological fungus-based product for bed bugs, which I think will be a pivotal point in insect control. This fungus targets bed bugs specifically, but if there are bio-applications like this for roaches, ants, and other interior pests, it will be a game changer. I don't think bait-based treatments are going anywhere soon, but I could see a future where all-around interior pest treatment may involve using a spore-based spray to treat any insect invaders. 50. Story 13. A true cure for depression. Not just something that manages it, not something that takes the edge off, but something that actually fixes it at the root. Feels like one of those things that should exist by now, especially considering how many people deal with it in some form. Because depression isn't just feeling sad. It's heavier than that. It changes how you think, how you feel, how you experience everything. Things that used to matter don't feel the same. Motivation disappears. Even basic tasks can feel like too much. And the worst part is, it's not always tied to something obvious. Sometimes it's just there, without a clear reason you can point to. And what's frustrating is how inconsistent the current solutions are. Therapy can help, medication can help, lifestyle changes can help, but none of it is guaranteed, and what works for one person might not work for someone else. So a lot of people end up in this process of trial and error, trying different approaches, adjusting, hoping something clicks, which is hard, especially when you're already struggling. And part of the reason it's so difficult is that depression isn't coming from just one place. It's not purely chemical, not purely psychological, not purely environmental. It's usually some mix of all of those, which makes it harder to isolate and fix in a straightforward way. But still, it feels like something we should be closer to solving. Not just coping with it, not just learning to manage it, but actually restoring that baseline where things feel normal again, where energy, interest, and clarity come back without constant effort. Because for something that affects so many people, in such a deep and personal way, the lack of a clear, reliable solution makes it feel like one of the most important inventions that doesn't exist yet. Story 14. A real cure for asthma. Not inhalers, not management, but something that actually fixes it. Feels like one of those things that should have been solved already, especially considering how common it is. Because asthma isn't just an inconvenience, it's this constant underlying thing you have to think about. Breathing, something that's supposed to be automatic, suddenly becomes something you're aware of. Triggers are everywhere too. Cold air, exercise, dust, stress, allergies. Things that most people don't even think about can set it off. And when it hits, it's not subtle. It's tightness, wheezing, that feeling like you can't quite get a full breath, like your body is just not cooperating with something as basic as breathing. And even if you manage it well, there's always that awareness in the background, like you're one trigger away from it flaring up again. The tools we have work, but they don't solve it. Inhalers open the airways, medications reduce inflammation, but it's all about control, not cure. You're managing a condition instead of eliminating it. And for something so fundamental, breathing, that feels like a huge gap. And part of the challenge is how complex it is. Asthma isn't just one single cause. It's inflammation, immune response, airway sensitivity, sometimes genetic factors, sometimes environmental, all interacting in ways that aren't identical from person to person. So finding one clean universal fix isn't as straightforward as it sounds. But still, it feels like we should be closer. Because for something that affects people daily, something that limits basic activity, something that can turn serious fast, the idea that we're still relying on management instead of resolution makes it feel like one of those problems that's just waiting for a real breakthrough. And until that happens, it stays in that category of things that should exist by now, but somehow don't. Story 15. Teleporters are one of those things that feel like they should exist by now, purely based on how far everything else has come. Like we've got instant communication across the planet, we can stream video from space, we can send robots to other planets. But I still have to physically sit in traffic to go somewhere. It just feels outdated. The idea of stepping into something and instantly being somewhere else is so simple on paper, and yet completely out of reach in reality. No travel time, no delays, no airports, no packing, no commuting, just point A to point B, instantly. It would completely change how people live, work, and travel. Everything. And it's not just about convenience either. Distance would basically stop mattering. You could live anywhere, work anywhere, Visit anyone at any time without planning your whole day around it. The entire structure of cities, jobs, even countries would probably shift if moving between places became that easy. But then you start thinking about how it would actually work, and it gets kind of unsettling. Are you being moved or copied? Is the you that arrives the same you that left? Or is it a perfect reconstruction? Because if it's breaking you down and rebuilding you somewhere else, that raises some questions people might not be comfortable answering. And then there's the technical side, which is just insane. You'd have to map and transfer every single particle of a human body perfectly, instantly, without error. That's not just difficult, it's on a level we can't even realistically approach yet. Still, the fact that we're so advanced in so many areas, but something like this is still completely in the realm of science fiction, makes it feel like we're missing a whole category of breakthroughs. Because yeah, where is the Star Trek future? We got the screens, we got the tech, but we're still stuck commuting. Story 16. A cold medicine that actually cures a cold instead of just masking the symptoms feels like one of those things that should absolutely exist by now. Because right now, when you get a cold, the solution is basically just deal with it. You take something for congestion, something for your throat, something for headaches, maybe something to help you sleep. But none of it actually stops the cold itself. It just makes you feel slightly less miserable while your body fights it off on its own. And that's the frustrating part. We've got insanely advanced medicine. We can treat complex diseases, perform surgeries, develop targeted therapies. But when it comes to something as common as a cold, it's still rest, fluids, wait it out. It feels almost primitive. Part of the issue is that the common cold isn't just one virus. It's a whole group of different viruses that can cause similar symptoms. So creating one universal cure isn't as simple as targeting a single thing. But still, you'd think we'd have something more direct by now, especially considering how often it happens. People lose days of productivity, sleep gets messed up, everything feels slower, and you're just stuck in that fog waiting for it to pass. It's not life-threatening most of the time, but it's disruptive enough that you really feel it. So yeah, the idea that we can do all these complex medical things, but still don't have a simple, reliable way to just end a cold once it starts, makes it feel like one of those gaps that hasn't quite caught up yet. Because at this point, just wait it out feels like an answer we should have moved past a long time ago. Story 17. Sustainable nuclear fusion feels like one of those things that's always almost here. Like it's permanently just a few breakthroughs away, even though people have been saying that for decades. Because if it actually worked at scale, it would change everything. Clean energy, basically unlimited fuel, no long-term radioactive waste in the same way as current nuclear power. It's the kind of solution that sounds almost too perfect. You're essentially recreating the process that powers the sun, but here on Earth, in a controlled way. And if you could do that reliably, energy as a problem would look completely different. But the gap between the idea works and it works in the real world is massive. Fusion requires incredibly high temperatures and pressure just to get started. And then the real challenge is keeping it stable long enough to produce more energy than you put in. That's been the sticking point. We can create fusion reactions, but sustaining them efficiently is a whole different level of difficulty. And that's why it's been stuck in this weird space for so long. There's constant progress, new experiments, better results, more efficient designs, but it hasn't crossed that line into something practical and widely usable yet. It's always promising, always advancing, but never quite there. Still, it feels like one of the most important inventions that doesn't fully exist yet. Because unlike a lot of other ideas, this one doesn't just make life more convenient. It could reshape entire systems. Energy, environment, economics, everything tied to power would shift if fusion became viable. And that's why it's so frustrating and fascinating at the same time, because it's not science fiction. It's real, just not finished. Story 18. A device that can print small batch integrated circuits like a 3D printer feels like one of those inventions that would completely flip how technology gets created, especially for individuals and small teams. Because right now, making chips is locked behind massive infrastructure. You've got huge fabrication plants, insanely expensive equipment, highly specialized processes. It's not something you can just experiment with casually. Even if you have a great idea for a custom chip, actually producing it means going through layers of cost, time, and scale that just don't make sense for small runs. So most people don't even try. They work around it instead, using off-the-shelf components, adapting designs, compromising on what they actually want to build, because the barrier to making something custom is just too high. But imagine if that barrier disappeared. You design a circuit, send it to a machine, and it prints a functional chip right there. Not mass production, not perfect at first, but good enough for prototyping, testing, small-scale use. It would be like what 3D printing did for physical objects, but for electronics at a much deeper level. And the impact would be huge. Innovation wouldn't be limited by access to fabrication anymore. Students, hobbyists, startups, anyone could experiment, iterate quickly, create specialized hardware without needing to scale up immediately. But the reason it doesn't exist yet, at least not in that form, is because of how complex chip manufacturing actually is. We're talking about incredibly tiny structures, layers built with extreme precision, materials that require very controlled environments. Translating that into something compact, affordable, and flexible enough to sit on a desk is a massive challenge. Still, it feels like the kind of leap that would unlock a whole new wave of creativity. Because right now, software is easy to build, hardware is not. And something like this would start to close that gap. Which is why it feels like one of those inventions that's not just missing, but waiting. Story 19. Something that perfectly mimics the taste and texture of unhealthy food, but with a fraction of the calories, feels like one of those inventions that would instantly change how people eat overnight. Because let's be honest, most of the time it's not about hunger, it's about craving. The crunch, the softness, the richness, the salt, the sugar. All those combinations that make certain foods feel satisfying in a way that healthy alternatives just don't quite match. And yeah, there are substitutes out there, but they always feel like substitutes. Close, but not quite right. So you end up choosing between two things. Either you eat what tastes good and deal with the consequences, or you eat what's better for you and feel like you're compromising. And that trade-off has been around forever. Which is why something that removes that trade-off completely feels almost too good to be real. Imagine eating exactly what you want. Same flavor, same texture, same experience, but without the downside. No excess calories, no negative impact, just the enjoyment part. It would completely shift how people approach food, dieting, even health in general. But that's where it gets complicated, because what makes food unhealthy is often the same thing that makes it taste good. Fats, sugars, certain textures, how it breaks down in your mouth. Recreating that experience without the underlying components isn't just a cooking problem, it's a chemical and sensory one. Still, we're getting closer in small ways. Better substitutes, improved formulations, things that are starting to narrow the gap, but nothing that fully replaces the real thing yet. And that's why it feels like such an obvious missing piece, because if you could keep the experience and remove the cost, you wouldn't just improve diets. You'd remove one of the biggest daily trade-offs people deal with. And that's the kind of invention that wouldn't just be popular, it would be everywhere. Story 20. A real cure for baldness. Not treatments that slow it down, Not temporary fixes, but something that actually restores hair fully and permanently. Feels like one of those things that should have been solved a long time ago. Because it's so common. It affects millions of people, and it's not just about appearance. It's about confidence, identity, how you see yourself. And yet, the options we have are still kind of stuck in this in-between space. You've got medications that may or may not work, come with side effects, and require long-term use. You've got transplants, which can be effective but are expensive and still limited by how much donor hair you have. And then there's everything else. Shampoos, oils, products that promise way more than they deliver. So instead of a cure, it's all management, trying to hold on to what you have, slow the process, work around it, but not actually reverse it in a clean, reliable way. And what's surprising is that it doesn't feel like an impossible problem. Hair grows naturally. Your body knows how to do it. It's not like creating something from scratch. It's more about reactivating or restoring a process that already exists, which makes it feel like we're close, but not quite there. The challenge is that hair loss isn't just one simple cause. It's genetics, hormones, follicle sensitivity, biological signaling, all interacting in ways that are hard to fully override. So even if you target one part of the process, others still come into play. But still, for something this widespread, this understood, this consistently researched, it feels like we should have a more definitive solution by now. Not just slowing it down, not just working around it, but actually fixing it. Because for something so visible, so common, and so personally impactful, the fact that we're still dealing with partial solutions makes it feel like one of those problems that's just waiting for its breakthrough.
Story 21. It's kind of wild when you think about it. We can have hundreds of drones flying in perfect formation, creating moving shapes in the sky like dragons, all coordinated down to the second. But we still rely on humans not to run red lights or stop on train tracks. Like the technology clearly exists. We already have GPS, sensors, real-time tracking, automated braking, lane assist. Cars can already kind of correct you if you mess up. So the idea of taking that one step further, where vehicles are aware of each other and automatically maintain spacing, obey signals, and prevent obvious dangerous mistakes, doesn't sound that far-fetched. So why isn't it standard? Part of it is control.
The moment you start talking about mandatory tracking systems or centralized coordination, you're also talking about giving up a level of personal control over driving. People like being in charge of their own vehicle, even if that comes with risk. Turning driving into something partially automated or externally guided changes that dynamic completely. Then there's the scale. Coordinating a few hundred drones in a controlled environment is one thing. Coordinating millions of cars in real time across different regions, conditions, systems, and edge cases is a whole different level of complexity. Roads are unpredictable. Weather, pedestrians, construction, human behavior. It's not as clean as the sky. And there's also the transition problem. You can't just flip a switch and have every car suddenly be part of that system. You'd have old cars, new cars, partial adoption, different standards, and that mix creates its own risks. But still, it does feel like we're in this weird middle phase, where the technology is almost there, but the systems, rules, and acceptance around it haven't caught up yet. Because when you compare it side by side, perfectly synchronized drones versus everyday traffic chaos, it really makes you wonder how much of the problem is technical and how much of it is everything else. Story 22. An MRI machine that doesn't feel like being locked inside a coffin feels like such an obvious upgrade that it's almost surprising it isn't the standard by now. because the experience itself is honestly worse than what you're even there for. You're already dealing with stress. Something's wrong. You need a scan. And then on top of that, you're asked to lie perfectly still while being slowly slid into this tight, enclosed tube surrounded by loud mechanical noises with almost no sense of space. For a lot of people, that's not just uncomfortable, it's straight up panic-inducing. And it's not rare either. Claustrophobia, anxiety, that feeling of being trapped, it hits way more people than you'd expect. And the solution is usually just trying to stay calm, maybe closing your eyes, or in some cases being sedated, which feels like a workaround rather than an actual fix, which is what makes it feel outdated. Because we've got the technology to do incredibly detailed imaging of the human body, but the physical design still feels like it hasn't caught up with the human experience of actually using it. It's optimized for function, not comfort. It feels like there should be alternatives by now. More open designs, less confined spaces, quieter operation. Something that makes the process feel less like being stuck in a machine and more like just getting scanned. And yeah, there are some versions that try to address this, but they're not the standard and not always available depending on where you go. So you end up with this situation where the technology itself is advanced, but the experience is still something people dread. And that's what makes it feel like a missing upgrade. Because for something so important, it shouldn't also feel like something you have to mentally brace yourself for just to get through. Story 23. Organ cloning for transplantation feels like one of those breakthroughs that would instantly change medicine in a way that's hard to even fully grasp. Because right now, the system is built around waiting for a donor, hoping there's a match, dealing with long lists, uncertainty, and in many cases, time running out. And even when a transplant does happen, it's not a perfect solution. Your body still recognizes that organ as something foreign, which is why people have to take immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives just to keep it from being rejected. So the idea of using your own cells to grow a replacement organ, something your body would recognize as itself, feels like it solves multiple problems at once. No waiting lists, no compatibility issues, no lifelong anti-rejection medication. It would turn transplants from something rare and uncertain into something almost routine. Damaged organ? Replace it. Failure? Grow a new one. It shifts the whole system from managing decline to actually restoring function. And the wild part is, we're not completely starting from zero. There's already work being done with stem cells, tissue engineering, even early forms of lab-grown structures. But scaling that up to fully functional organs that can be safely transplanted is a whole different level of complexity. You're not just growing tissue, you're recreating something incredibly intricate. Blood vessels, structure, function, integration with the body, all of it has to work perfectly. Still, it feels like one of those ideas that isn't impossible, just unfinished. Because once something like that exists in a reliable way, it doesn't just improve outcomes. It completely redefines what's possible in medicine. And that's why it feels like one of the biggest inventions that doesn't exist yet. Not because we can't imagine it, but because we're so close to the idea, and not quite there in reality. Story 24. A time machine is one of those ideas that feels so natural to imagine that it's almost weird it doesn't exist, like it's been part of human thinking for so long that it feels like we should have figured it out by now. Because the appeal is obvious. Go back and fix something. Relive a moment. See how things actually happened. Or go forward and find out how everything turns out. It's not even just curiosity. It's control over something we've never had control over. Time itself. And everyone immediately thinks of the same thing. What would I change? That one decision, that one moment, that one path you didn't take. A time machine turns all of that into something you could actually act on instead of just thinking about it. It removes the finality of choices, which is kind of the one thing life is built around. But that's also where it starts to get messy. Because if you change something, what happens next? Do you create a new timeline? Do you erase the old one? Do you even come back as the same version of yourself? It stops being a simple tool and starts becoming something that breaks the rules we're used to. And then there's the forward side. Imagine seeing your future. Would you even want to know? Would it motivate you? Or ruin the experience of getting there? And on top of all that, the technical side is basically on another level entirely. We're not just talking about building something complex. We're talking about manipulating time, which we don't even fully understand in the first place. Still, it's one of those ideas that Nev Story 25, a time machine, is one of those ideas that feels so natural to imagine that it's almost weird it doesn't exist, like it's been part of human thinking for so long that it feels like we should have figured it out by now. Because the appeal is obvious. Go back and fix something. Relive a moment. See how things actually happened. Or go forward and find out how everything turns out. It's not even just curiosity. It's control over something we've never had control over, time itself. And everyone immediately thinks of the same thing. What would I change? That one decision, that one moment, that one path you didn't take. A time machine turns all of that into something you could actually act on instead of just thinking about it. It removes the finality of choices, which is kind of the one thing life is built around. But that's also where it starts to get messy. Because if you change something, what happens next? Do you create a new timeline? Do you erase the old one? Do you even come back as the same version of yourself? It stops being a simple tool and starts becoming something that breaks the rules we're used to. And then there's the forward side. Imagine seeing your future. Would you even want to know? Would it motivate you or ruin the experience of getting there? And on top of all that, the technical side is basically on another level entirely. We're not just talking about building something complex. We're talking about manipulating time, which we don't even fully understand in the first place. Still, it's one of those ideas that never goes away, because more than anything else, it taps into that feeling that time is the one thing you can't get back, no matter what you do. And the idea that there could be a way around that, even just a little, is what makes it so hard to let go of. Story 26. Free energy is one of those ideas that sounds almost too good to be real, which is probably why it keeps coming up over and over again. The thought that you could have unlimited energy, no cost, no fuel, no depletion, just something that keeps running without needing constant input, feels like it would solve so many problems at once. Because energy is tied to everything. Electricity, transportation, industry, cost of living. So much of modern life depends on generating and distributing energy. So if you remove the limitation there, everything else shifts. Prices drop, access increases, entire systems change. And that's what makes the idea so appealing. But at the same time, it clashes with how we understand physics. Energy doesn't just appear from nowhere. There's always some form of input, some source, some conversion happening. Even the most efficient systems we have still rely on something. Sunlight, wind, nuclear reactions, stored fuel. So the idea of truly free energy, in the sense of something that produces more than it consumes with no external input, runs into some fundamental limits. That's why it sits in this weird space. On one side, it feels like something that would revolutionize everything overnight. On the other, it bumps up against rules that we haven't found a way around. But even if true free energy isn't realistic, we're already moving towards something close in spirit. More efficient systems, renewable sources, ways of generating power that feel almost limitless compared to traditional methods. It's not free in the absolute sense, but it's getting closer to being abundant and accessible. Still, the idea sticks, because it represents something bigger than just energy. It's the idea of removing a major constraint from human life. And that's why it feels like one of those inventions that, if it ever did exist, would change everything overnight. Story 27. Goggles that actually don't fog up. Feel like one of those stupidly simple problems that somehow still isn't fully solved, even though everyone who's ever worn them has dealt with it. Like, how is this still a thing? You put them on, everything's clear for like 5 seconds, and then suddenly you're looking through a cloudy mess like you're underwater in milk. And it always happens at the worst time. Swimming, working out, skiing, doing anything where you actually need to see properly. And yeah, there are anti-fog solutions, sprays, coatings, tricks, spit, special materials, but none of them are permanent. They work for a bit, wear off, need to be reapplied, or just don't hold up in real conditions. So you're constantly managing something that feels like it should have been designed out of the problem entirely, which is what makes it so frustrating, because this isn't some impossible futuristic concept. It's literally just preventing condensation from forming on a surface. We've got advanced materials, nanotech, coatings for everything else, but goggles still fog up like it's 1980. It feels like there should be a version where you just put them on and forget about it. No maintenance, no tricks, no, it works if you do this first. Just clear vision, every time, regardless of temperature or humidity. And the fact that we're still dealing with this tiny, annoying, universal problem makes it feel like one of those everyday gaps that somehow slipped through all the major advancements. Because honestly, this should have been solved ages ago. Story 28. A cigarette that heals instead of harms. Sounds like one of those completely backwards ideas that somehow makes perfect sense the more you think about it. Because the habit itself isn't always the problem. It's a ritual. The pause, the inhale, the exhale, the moment of stepping away from everything for a few minutes. That's what people get attached to. It's a built-in break, a reset button, something to do with your hands, something that forces you to slow down for a second. But the actual substance? That's where all the damage comes from. So the idea of keeping the experience but removing the harm, or even flipping it into something beneficial, feels like a massive missed opportunity. Imagine something that gives you that same rhythm, that same calming effect, but instead of damaging your lungs or body, it actually helps you. Maybe it delivers something restorative, reduces stress in a real way, supports your system instead of wearing it down. No long-term damage, no trade-off. It sounds almost too ideal. And yeah, there are things that try to move in that direction. Vapes, herbal alternatives, different delivery systems, but none of them really replace the original experience in a way that feels the same, and they definitely don't turn it into something genuinely healthy, which is what makes the idea so interesting, because it's not about removing the habit entirely, it's about redesigning it. Taking something people already do and making it work for them instead of against them. And that's why it feels like one of those inventions that doesn't exist yet, but should in some form. Because if you could keep the ritual and remove the harm, you wouldn't just be replacing something bad, you'd be transforming it. Story 29. A fast, full-body 3D scan machine that could instantly map your body at different depths and tell you everything going on inside, current issues, early signs of disease, things that might become a problem later. Feels like one of those inventions that would completely change how we approach health. Because right now, everything is reactive. You feel something, you go get it checked. You wait for symptoms, then you investigate. Even with regular checkups, it's still limited. Specific tests, specific areas, specific concerns. There's no single clear snapshot of your entire body in real time. So the idea of just stepping into a machine, standing there for a minute, and getting a full report on everything feels like a massive leap. No guessing, no waiting, no "we'll monitor it." You'd catch problems early, maybe even before they fully develop. It would shift healthcare from reacting to preventing, which is where it really needs to go. But then you think about how complex that actually is. Different tissues, different systems, different types of issues, structural, chemical, cellular, all require different ways of being detected. Combining all of that into one fast, safe, affordable scan is way harder than it sounds. And then there's the second part, using that same kind of scan for online shopping. That's honestly just as interesting. Instead of guessing sizes, reading reviews, hoping something fits, you'd have a perfect digital model of your body. You could try on clothes virtually and know exactly how they'll fit before buying. No returns, no sizing charts, no trial and error. It sounds simple, but it would completely change online shopping. Less waste, less hassle, more accuracy. And what's interesting is that both ideas are kind of connected. They're about turning your body into something measurable, understandable, mapped in detail, whether it's for health or for everyday use. We're already moving in that direction in small ways, with scans, wearables, data tracking, but nothing that brings it all together into one seamless system yet. And that's why it feels like such an obvious missing piece, because once something like that exists, it doesn't just improve things, it changes how you interact with your own body entirely. Story 30. UV reflective road markings with UV lights on cars and streetlights feels like one of those ideas that's so simple, it's almost frustrating it's not already standard. Because driving at night, in rain, or in poor visibility is still way harder than it should be. Road lines fade, reflections get lost, headlights bounce everywhere, and suddenly something as basic as staying in your lane takes way more effort than it should. And yeah, there are reflective paints and markers, but they're inconsistent, wear down over time, and don't always hold up in bad conditions. So the idea of having markings that actively light up under UV, combined with vehicles and streetlights designed to trigger that visibility, just makes sense. Instead of relying on passive reflection, you'd have something that's clearly defined, always visible, almost glowing in a controlled way. Lanes, edges, crossings. Everything becomes easier to read instantly, even in the worst conditions. And the cool part is, it doesn't sound like some crazy futuristic leap. We already use reflective materials. We already have different lighting systems. UV isn't some unknown technology. It feels more like a coordination problem than a technological one, getting infrastructure and vehicles to align around the same standard. And the impact would be huge. Safer driving, less strain on the eyes, clearer navigation, especially in places with poor lighting or harsh weather. It's one of those upgrades that doesn't change the experience dramatically, but makes everything smoother and safer without you even thinking about it. So it sits in that category of ideas that aren't impossible, aren't even that complex, just somehow not fully implemented. Which honestly makes it feel like one of those, why don't we already have this moments? Because for something so basic, improving visibility feels like low-hanging fruit that should have been picked a long time ago. Story 31. Flying cars are one of those things that have been right around the corner for so long that it almost feels like we were promised them by now. Like growing up, it felt inevitable. The future meant cars in the sky, no traffic, no roads packed bumper to bumper, just smooth movement above everything. And technically, we kind of do have the pieces: drones, helicopters, electric vertical takeoff vehicles. It's not like flight itself is the problem anymore. So why aren't we all flying to work? Because the moment you think past the idea, it gets complicated fast. It's not just about making a car that can fly. It's about managing thousands, maybe millions of them in the same airspace safely. Traffic in the sky is a completely different problem. You can't just pull over. You can't afford mistakes, and everything has to be coordinated in real time with near-perfect precision. Then there's the safety side. If something goes wrong on the road, it's bad. If something goes wrong in the air, it's a different level of risk entirely. So the standards, the reliability, the fail-safes all have to be way higher. And then there's noise, cost, infrastructure, regulation, all the stuff that doesn't show up in the futuristic version. Still, it's weird how close and how far it feels at the same time. We've got the tech to lift off, hover, move around, but turning that into something every day people can safely use at scale is the real challenge. So flying cars sit in this strange space, not impossible, not even fully theoretical, just not practical yet. And that's why it still feels like we're missing a piece of the future we were kind of expecting to already be living in. Story 32, legit dream recording. Not rough interpretations, not blurry reconstructions, but actually capturing what you really see and experience in your dreams. Feels like one of those inventions that would completely blur the line between your inner world and reality. Because dreams aren't just random noise. When you're in them, they feel real. Full environments, people, conversations, emotions, sometimes more intense than real life. And then you wake up and it all just disappears. You try to hold on to it, but it slips away piece by piece until you're left with fragments that don't quite make sense anymore. So the idea of actually recording that and watching it back exactly as it happened is kind of insane. You'd finally see what your brain is doing when you're not in control, what it creates, how it connects things, what it focuses on. All those weird, vivid, sometimes meaningful, sometimes completely chaotic experiences would suddenly be something you could revisit. But it also raises some questions, because dreams aren't filtered. They mix memories, fears, random thoughts, things you didn't even know you were thinking about. Watching that back might not always be entertaining. It might feel invasive, even to yourself. Like you're seeing a version of your mind you're not used to confronting directly. And then there's the technical side, which is just on another level. We're starting to decode basic brain signals, reconstruct simple visuals, map activity patterns, but turning that into a full, accurate recording of a dream, with detail, continuity, meaning, is way beyond where we are right now. Still, it doesn't feel impossible forever, because the brain is generating something. It's not nothing. So in theory, if you could read it precisely enough, you could reconstruct it. And that's what makes it so fascinating. Because it's not just about technology. It's about accessing a part of your own experience that's always been there, but never fully reachable. And the moment that becomes possible, it changes how we understand ourselves completely. Story 33. An AI that actually creates jobs for humans instead of just replacing them feels like one of those ideas that flips the whole conversation around technology in a really interesting way. Because right now, most of the focus is on what AI takes away. Automation, efficiency, replacing roles, reducing the need for people in certain areas. And while that's real, it creates this constant underlying fear that the more advanced things get, the fewer opportunities there are for actual humans.
But what if it worked the other way too? Imagine an AI that analyzes a company, how it operates, where it's inefficient, where things could improve, where human input is missing, and then generates entirely new roles that don't exist yet. Not just filling positions, but creating them. Roles tailored to actual needs that haven't been clearly defined, like identifying gaps no one noticed. Maybe it sees that communication between teams is slowing things down and creates a role focused on bridging that. Or it finds that customers are dropping off at a certain stage and designs a position specifically to improve that experience. Not generic jobs, but highly specific, purpose-built ones. And the interesting part is, those roles would be based on real data, not assumptions. So instead of hiring based on tradition or guesswork, companies would be building positions that directly improve how things function. It shifts AI from being something that replaces people to something that helps define where people are actually needed. Of course, it wouldn't be perfect. You'd still need judgment, context, human understanding of what makes sense in practice. And there's always the question of whether companies would actually choose to create those roles instead of just optimizing for fewer people. But the idea itself feels like a missing piece, because if AI is powerful enough to reshape how work is done, it should also be able to reshape what work exists in the first place. And that's a very different future than the one people usually imagine. Story 34. I really thought by now we'd all be calling each other via holograms, like full-on projecting people into the room, not just staring at flat screens like we still do. If you asked me 10 to 15 years ago what the future would look like, that was the obvious answer. Not better cameras, not slightly higher resolution video calls. Actual presence. Someone standing there in front of you, moving, talking, like they're physically there. It felt like the natural next step. We went from phone calls to video, so holograms just seemed like the next upgrade. But somehow, we just stalled. Yeah, video calls got clearer, faster, more reliable. You can talk to anyone instantly from anywhere. But the experience itself hasn't really changed. It's still rectangles on a screen, still flat, still kind of disconnected. It works, but it doesn't feel like the future we imagined. And it's weird because the tech isn't completely out of reach. We've got 3D scanning, depth sensors, AR, VR, projection systems. Pieces of it exist. You can see early versions in demos and experiments, but turning that into something seamless, affordable, and normal for everyday use just hasn't happened yet. Maybe it's the cost. Maybe it's practicality. Maybe it's just that video calls are good enough, so there's no real push to replace them. But it still feels like a missing piece, because communication is such a huge part of life, and the idea of making it feel more real instead of just more convenient seems like an obvious direction. Instead, we just did the same thing, slightly better. And yeah, it works. But it definitely doesn't feel like the future we thought we'd be living in by now. Story 35. Layered brake lights, like multiple levels stacked or changing intensity, feel like such an obvious upgrade that it's kind of surprising we're still relying on the same basic red light system. Because right now, it's basically binary. Either the brake lights are on, or they're not, and that doesn't really tell you much. Is the car slowing down gently? Tapping the brakes? Slamming them because something's wrong ahead? You have to guess based on context, distance, and reaction time, which isn't ideal when everything is happening fast. So the idea of having layered signals, maybe one light for light deceleration, more lights as braking intensity increases, just makes sense. You'd instantly know how serious the slowdown is. A slight adjustment? No big deal. Full stack of lights? Okay, something's happening, react immediately.
It turns braking into something more informative instead of just reactive. And it's not like the tech is complicated. Cars already know how hard they're braking. That data is already there. It's just not being communicated visually in a more useful way, which is what makes it feel like a missed opportunity. Because this isn't some futuristic system. It's a small design change that could make driving safer without changing behavior, rules, or infrastructure. Just better communication between vehicles. And when you think about how many accidents come down to reaction time and misjudging what the car ahead is doing, something like this could actually make a noticeable difference. So it sits in that category of ideas that are simple, practical, and already possible, just somehow not standard, which honestly makes it more surprising than the big, complex inventions that don't exist yet, because this one feels like it should have already happened. Story 36. Tesla coil-style full wireless charging for cars, or even the idea of water-powered vehicles, are two of those concepts that feel like they belong in everyday life by now, but somehow are still stuck in that almost possible but not quite practical category. Wireless charging especially just feels like it should already be normal. We've got it for phones. You just place it down and it charges. So naturally, the next step feels like scaling that up. Imagine roads or parking spaces that charge your car automatically. No cables, no plugging in, just energy transferring through the air or through the ground while you're parked, or even while you're driving. And technically, pieces of that exist. There are systems that can wirelessly transfer power over short distances, even prototypes for charging roads. But scaling it efficiently, safely, and without massive energy loss is where things get tricky. The bigger the distance and the power required, the harder it becomes to make it practical. Then there's the idea of water-powered cars, which sounds even more appealing on the surface. Water is everywhere. It's simple. It feels like the perfect fuel. But the catch is that water itself isn't a fuel. It's already a spent form of energy. You can split it into hydrogen and oxygen to use as fuel, but that process requires energy in the first place. So it's not about getting energy from water, it's about storing and using energy in a different form. Still, both ideas point to the same thing. People want simpler, cleaner, more seamless ways to power things. No constant refueling, no cables, no complicated systems. Just something that works in the background without effort. And that's why these ideas keep coming up. Because even if they're not fully practical yet, they represent a direction that feels like the natural evolution of how we use energy. Less friction, more flow. And the fact that we're not quite there yet makes it feel like another piece of the future that's still just out of reach. Story 37. A mouthwash that actually removes plaque and stops decay without needing to scrape your teeth feels like one of those things that should have replaced brushing by now. Because, let's be honest, brushing and flossing feel kind of primitive. You're literally scraping buildup off your teeth twice a day, trying to reach every corner, hoping you didn't miss anything. And even when you do it right, you still end up going to the dentist to have them clean what you couldn't get. So the idea of just swishing something for 30 seconds and having it break down plaque, neutralize bacteria, and prevent decay completely feels like such an obvious upgrade. No effort, no technique. No, did I miss a spot? Just done. And it's not like mouthwash doesn't already exist, it just doesn't go far enough. It freshens breath, reduces bacteria a bit, but it doesn't actually replace the mechanical part of cleaning. It's supportive, not a solution, which is what makes it feel like a gap, because plaque is basically a biological buildup. In theory, something could be designed to dissolve it safely without damaging enamel or gums. Something targeted, precise, effective. But that balance is probably the hard part. You need something strong enough to break down buildup in bacteria, but gentle enough not to harm the very thing you're trying to protect. And doing that consistently, safely, every day is a bigger challenge than it sounds. Still, it feels like one of those everyday problems that hasn't caught up with modern capabilities yet. Because if you could replace brushing with something simpler and more effective, it wouldn't just be convenient. It would completely change how people take care of their teeth. And honestly, most people would switch instantly. Story 38, widely available hologram technology, is one of those things that feels like it should already be everywhere, especially considering how consistently it shows up in basically every sci-fi version of the future. Like it's almost a default. You think future, and you picture holograms, floating displays, people projected into rooms, interactive 3D visuals you can walk around and interact with. It feels like such a natural step beyond screens that it's weird we're still staring at flat rectangles for everything. And it's not like we have nothing. There are versions of it, projections, AR glasses, light-based illusions, even some early hologram-like displays, but none of it feels seamless or normal. It's either bulky, expensive, limited, or just not convincing enough to replace what we already use, which is what makes it feel like we skipped a step. We went from basic screens to insanely good screens, but never really moved beyond them. Everything got sharper, faster, thinner, but still flat, and the potential for holograms is huge. Work, communication, design, entertainment. Being able to see and interact with things in true 3D space would change how we process information entirely. It's not just about looking cool, it's about making things more intuitive, more natural, but the challenge is deeper than it looks. Creating something that's visible from all angles, stable, bright enough, interactive, and affordable all at once is way harder than projecting an image onto a surface. You're basically trying to create light that behaves like a physical object. Still, it feels like one of those missing pieces of the future, because we already imagined it so clearly. We just haven't quite built it yet in a way that fits into everyday life. And that gap between what feels obvious and what actually exists is what makes it so noticeable. Story 39. Fully functional robotic limbs that actually connect to your nervous system and work like a real arm or leg feel like one of those things that should already be standard, especially when you look at how advanced robotics has become. Because we clearly know how to build machines. We've got robots that can walk, run, grab things, perform surgery, even do incredibly precise movements. So the idea of taking that and attaching it to a human body, letting someone control it naturally like their own limb, feels like the obvious next step. But somehow, we're not fully there yet. Yeah, prosthetics exist, and some of them are incredibly advanced. They can grip, move, even respond to certain signals. But it's not the same as a real limb. It's not fully intuitive, not fully responsive, not seamlessly connected to the nervous system in a way that feels natural. And that's the missing piece. Because a real arm isn't just movement, it's feedback. You feel pressure, temperature, texture. You don't think about moving your fingers, you just do it. It's instant, precise, automatic. Recreating that level of control and sensation is way more complex than just building a mechanical arm. You're not just solving a robotics problem, you're solving a biology problem. You need to read signals from the brain or nerves, translate them into movement, and then send information back so the person can actually feel what they're doing. And all of that has to happen in real time, flawlessly. Still, it feels like we're close. There are experiments, early versions, breakthroughs happening, but not something widely available, reliable, and truly lifelike yet. And that's what makes it feel like such a noticeable gap, Because when you compare what we can build externally to what we can integrate with the human body, there's this disconnect. We can make incredible machines. We just haven't fully merged them with ourselves yet. Story 40. A machine that could actually measure your real pain levels feels like one of those things that would completely change how medicine works, especially for people dealing with chronic pain. Because right now, pain is basically invisible. You can't scan it directly. You can't measure it objectively. You can only describe it on a scale of 1 to 10, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. What's a 7 for one person might be a 4 for someone else. It's subjective, inconsistent, and heavily dependent on how well someone can explain what they're feeling. And that's where the problem starts. If your pain doesn't look serious, or if tests don't show anything obvious, it's easy for it to be dismissed. People get told it's stress or anxiety, or that they're exaggerating, just because there's no clear, measurable proof of what they're experiencing. So the idea of a machine that could actually read your body and say, this is the level of pain, in a real objective way would be huge. No more guessing. No more trying to convince someone. No more being overlooked because your condition doesn't show up clearly on traditional tests. But the challenge is that pain isn't just one signal. It's neurological, chemical, emotional, contextual. It's processed in the brain in complex ways. Two people with the same physical issue can experience completely different levels of pain, which makes it hard to reduce to a single measurement. Still, it feels like something we should be closer to. We can track brain activity, nerve responses, stress signals. All the pieces are there in some form. It doesn't feel impossible that one day those could be combined into something that gives a clearer picture. And that's why it feels like such an important missing invention, because it's not just about technology, it's about validation. For a lot of people, just being able to prove that what they're feeling is real would change everything.